Story 1. Juha and the Clever Donkey and the Lost Treasure 1. Sunny afternoon, as Juha was strolling through the outskirts of his village, his eye caught a glint of something buried beneath an old, gnarled olive tree. Curious, he dug around and unearthed a weathered, rolled-up parchment. Unfurling it carefully, he discovered it was an ancient map marked with cryptic symbols that seemed to point towards a hidden treasure. Excitement bubbled within Juha. He pictured himself a wealthy man, his days of modest living behind him. He rushed to his loyal donkey, whom he affectionately called Himar, and shared the thrilling news. Himar, however, remained his usual stoic self, showing little enthusiasm for the prospect of buried riches. Juha packed a meager meal and his few simple tools, then mounted Himar, setting off towards the location indicated on the map, a remote and silent valley. The journey was long and filled with uneven paths, and Himar plodded along with his characteristic slowness and a low grumble, as if the hidden treasure was the least of his concerns. Finally, Juha arrived at the described valley. He eagerly began his search among the rocks and trees, the map clutched tightly in his hand, guiding his every step. But Himar, exhausted from the journey, had simply collapsed onto the ground, refusing to budge an inch further. Juha tried every trick he knew, gentle coaxing, tempting him with a handful of dried figs, even a bit of playful tugging on his reins. But the stubborn donkey remained as steadfast as a mountain. After hours of fruitless searching, despair began to creep into Juha's heart. He sat down beside his weary companion, feeling a wave of disappointment wash over him. He gazed around the quiet valley, listening to the gentle murmur of a nearby stream. Suddenly, an idea sparked in his mind. Juha began to dig a small hole near where Himar had settled. As he dug, he started to speak aloud as if talking to himself. "Ah, what a perfect place for burying something precious. If I had a treasure of great value, I would surely hide it here. A safe and quiet spot where no one would ever find it." Himar, who had been dozing with half-closed eyes, perked up his ears slightly, a flicker of curiosity in his gaze. Juha continued to mutter about gold and silver coins, sparkling jewels, and chests overflowing with riches that he would bury in such a secluded place if he ever came across them. Himar's interest seemed to grow with each whispered word. Juha elaborated on the imaginary treasure, describing its brilliance and beauty in vivid detail. Suddenly, Himar slowly rose to his feet and cautiously approached the small hole, peering into it with intense curiosity. He then began to twitch his ears nervously, as if he could almost hear the clinking of coins. Juha, playing his part masterfully, exclaimed, "By the heavens, could it be that something is actually buried here? Perhaps this is a sign." He then began to dig with renewed vigor, all the while keeping a close eye on his donkey's reaction. Himar's excitement visibly increased. He started nudging Juha with his nose and making soft, eager brays, as if urging him to dig faster. He even attempted to paw at the loose soil with his front hooves. Juha continued digging until he reached a reasonable depth. Then from his small satchel he pulled out a handful of shiny pebbles he had brought along and placed them at the bottom of the hole. "I've found it!" Juha cried out triumphantly. "We've found the treasure, Himar!" Himar peered into the hole at the glittering stones, his eyes wide with what appeared to be awe. He let out a joyful bray and began to prance around Juha in delighted circles. Juha carefully gathered his precious treasure, the shiny pebbles, and placed them in his satchel. He then mounted Himar, who was now full of energy and enthusiasm, and they slowly made their way back towards the village. Along the way, Himar trotted with a confident gait, as if he were carrying the heaviest of fortunes on his back. Juha chuckled to himself, having learned that even the most stubborn donkey could be motivated if something piqued its curiosity and perhaps a touch of greed, even if it was based on a mere illusion. When they arrived back in the village, Juha proudly displayed his treasure to the amused villagers, who chuckled at his clever trickery. But Juha said with a serious tone, "The important thing is that we returned safely, and Himar learned that stubbornness gets you nowhere when there's treasure to be found. Story 2. Juha and the Feast of the Misers. One time, Juha received an invitation to a feast hosted by a group of wealthy individuals known throughout the region for their extreme stinginess. Juha was well aware of their tight-fisted nature, but he accepted the invitation out of curiosity and a desire to witness their supposed generosity. When Juha arrived at the grand house of one of the hosts, he found a gathering of guests seated around a long table that was remarkably bare. A few small dishes containing minuscule portions of food were strategically placed, as if merely to suggest that a feast was taking place. The hosts began to extol the virtues of thrift and economy, emphasizing how wasteful extravagance was. They ate their tiny portions with excruciating slowness, as if each morsel was a precious gem to be savored for as long as possible. Juha sat quietly, observing this peculiar scene. His stomach rumbled with hunger, but he found himself more entertained by the sheer absurdity of the miser's behavior. After a considerable amount of time had passed, and everyone had consumed only a few meager bites, one of the hosts turned to Juha with a smug look and asked, "Well, Juha, what do you think of our feast? Is it not lavish and generous?" Juha smiled calmly and replied, "Indeed, it is a magnificent feast. I have already eaten my fill simply by witnessing your renowned generosity and abundance." The hosts exchanged puzzled glances. How could anyone be full after merely looking at such small amounts of food? Juha continued with a serious expression. "It reminds me of a remarkable tale of an even grander feast, where none of the guests ate a single thing either." The miser's curiosity was piqued, and they eagerly asked him to share the story. Juha began to narrate in a soothing voice. It is said that a king, who was known for his unparalleled stinginess, once invited all the wealthiest men in his kingdom to a grand banquet. When they were all assembled, the king ordered his servants to bring out empty plates. The bewildered guests stared at the bare dishes and inquired about the food. The king replied, "I have invited you to admire my exquisite gold and silver tableware. Is not the sight of such splendor enough to satisfy the eye?" Juha paused for a moment, then looked directly at the tight-fisted hosts and said with a subtle smile, "Do you see now? Your feast reminds me of the banquet of that miserly king. My eyes, too, have been thoroughly satisfied by the sight of your empty generosity." The misers finally understood the pointedness of Juha's words, and a wave of embarrassment washed over them. They hastily tried to rectify the situation, ordering their servants to bring out more substantial dishes. But Juha politely declined, saying that he was already quite full from their initial display of abundance. Juha left the Feast of the Misers feeling rather pleased with himself. He had managed to teach them a valuable lesson about true generosity in his own witty and indirect way. And the misers perhaps learned that excessive stinginess could deprive them even of the pleasure of showcasing their wealth. I hope these 2 longer stories help create a calm and pleasant atmosphere before you drift off to sleep. Sweet dreams.